Hi, welcome back to another PineScript lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be covering how to appropriately or correctly declare your variables in your scripts. So variables are used in all programming languages. We've already covered a few examples of them. In this lesson, we're just going to keep things simple and cover the basic fundamentals of variable declaration. In order to declare a variable, we need to basically give it a name, and then that name is like a key. So we have a key and a value. So in today's example, we're going to be counting candles in our chart. So I want to count how many green candles are on my chart. So I'm going to say green candle count is set to 0. So right here, we have declared a variable. We've declared a variable with the name or key, green candle count, and we've given it the value 0. Now, PineScript will automatically determine what data type your variable is based on what value you give it. So PineScript knows that 0 without any decimal places is an integer value, a whole number value. So whatever we do with this variable will be treated as an integer value. If we were to add a decimal place like 0.1, suddenly this becomes a float. And now whatever we do to this variable needs to be governed by the rules of floating point numbers. And there are certain things you can and can't do with data types, so it's important that you understand how the data types work. The good news is you'll pick this up throughout the course. It's not particularly complex, but it is important that you understand how data types work. Now you can explicitly tell PineScript what type of variable you want. For example, if we wanted to tell PineScript that this green candle count needs to be a float, we can just add the word float in front of it and save the script. And now PineScript knows that even though there's no decimal place after this whole number value, this essentially becomes 0.0. PineScript is now treating this as a floating point number, even though we gave it an integer value. Now, if we were to change this to text, for example, a string, this won't work. If I save the script, PineScript says declared type float is not compatible with the assigned type string. So whatever data type you give it, you need to make sure it's accurate. But the option to explicitly define what data type your variable is possible using these data type operators. So this can be useful in certain situations. For example, if I get rid of this and I set green candle count to NA or not a number, this is basically null, nothing. I've set green candle count to literally nothing. It's not a data type of any kind. If I then want to draw that onto my chart, so let me paste the green candle count into the plot, save the script. You can see that it says down here, line 7, value with NA type cannot be assigned to a variable that was defined without a type keyword. So we cannot declare green candle count as NA, but if we add float on the end and save the script, this will now compile, and we are now plotting NA onto the chart. So that is one useful way of declaring a data type with nothing as its initial value. So we don't want this to be 0. We want this to be nothing. The only way to do that is to explicitly give this variable a type keyword. But we don't usually need to do this, so I'm going to get rid of that and set this back to 0 and save my script. So now we're plotting just 0 onto our chart on every bar. Now let's say that we want to count every green bar on our chart. To do that, we need to check if the closing price is greater than the opening price, then set green candle count to green candle count plus 1. Now notice that I used the colon equals operator here and I didn't just set equals. Now the reason for this is because once a variable is already declared, in order to overwrite the value that we've given this variable, we need to use the colon equals operator to reassign this variable to a new value. So for example, if I set this to 50 and I save the script, we will still be plotting 0 here and we get an error or a warning. This orange writing down here is a warning, not an error. It's just bringing to our attention that maybe we made a mistake. It says here that shadowing variable green candle count exists in the parent scope. Did you want to use the assign operator instead of the initialize operator or equals? So when you're first declaring a variable, you need to use the equals. That initializes the variable. You can't use the assign variable until the variable already exists. So if I save the script now, we'll get an error that green candle count is an undeclared variable. So the equals sign is for declaring a new variable, and the colon equals is for reassigning an existing variable a new value. So now if I change this to colon equals, instead of plotting 0 onto our chart, like we do here, if I use the colon equals, we will now be plotting 50 because our green candle count is being overwritten with the number 50, but only on bullish bars. So let's say we want to count all the green bars on our chart. To do that, we need to set green candle count to green candle count plus 1. So that will increment this variable by 1. It will get whatever its current value is and add 1 to it. So let me save the script here. And you'll notice that on each bullish bar in our chart, we were only drawing 1 onto the chart. And on bearish bars, we draw 0. The reason for this is that our variables are re-declared on every new bar on our chart. So every time a new bar, historical or real time, begins drawing onto our chart, our script code is run all over again. It just keeps looping our code. So every time our script runs, green candle count is set to 0. And so it never gets past 1 because on every new bar, this code is run again, green candle count is reset back to 0, and then incremented by 1 on bullish bars. If we want this variable to not update on new bars, but to persist across all of the bars on our chart, we need to use the VAR operator. So VAR converts this green candle count variable into what is called a persistent variable. So this variable will now persist across all of the bars on our chart. And so whenever we detect a green bar, the green candle count will increment by 1. Whenever we encounter a red or bearish bar, nothing will happen because our little if statement here will not be true. And don't worry, we'll cover if statements in more detail in future lessons. But for now, if I save this script, we will now be counting every green bar over historical price data. So if I save the script there, you can see that our line is incrementing slowly from bottom left to top right. If I reset my chart and hover over this last bar on my chart, we have 11,771 bullish bars on our chart from whenever our historical price action began. So that is the purpose of the VAR variable. Now the reason not all variables are VAR variables are because let's say we want to draw a shape whenever we detect a bullish bar. If I change draw shape to true, and then we use the plot shape function and we pass in our draw shape variable. If I save the script now, you can see an X plotting in our box whenever a bar is bullish. So for every green bar here, we have an X. If I change this draw shape to a VAR variable and I click save, all of these bars will have an X above them because the very first time we detect a bullish bar, draw shape will be set to true and it will never reset back to false because we're using a VAR variable. So let me save the script here to show you what I mean. Here you can see we have all these X's. If I go back to the very first bar on my chart using the Alt-G shortcut, here you can see that the very first bar on our chart is bullish. And so draw shape is set to true and it is never set back to false because this is a persistent variable. And so we draw X's on every single bar. If I get rid of VAR and save the script, now draw shape is reset on every new bar on our chart. And we want that to happen in this case for this particular variable because we want it to be reset on every new bar. We want each new bar to be considered as a brand new calculation. So that is why not all variables are persistent with this VAR tag, and we need to explicitly tell PineScript when we want a variable to be saved across all of the bars on our chart. This VAR can be useful for all kinds of things, such as saving your stop loss and target until one is hit and drawing that onto the chart. It can be useful for keeping track of certain market conditions. So for example, maybe you want to check when the RSI goes overbought. So you would set your VAR variable to true when the RSI goes overbought, and then you want to wait for a bearish candle. And once that happens, maybe you enter short, for example, and then maybe you reset your RSI flag or your RSI overbought monitoring variable. Those are some practical use cases for this variable type. But let's get rid of our draw shape variable here for a moment. And let's just count every single bar on our chart. To do that, we can rename our variable to total bars and get rid of our if statement and get rid of this and just plot total bars down here. Now, before we continue, I should probably quickly go over the naming conventions for variables. The most important thing you need to know is that variables cannot start with a number. So if we change this to 1 total bars and save the script, we'll get an error down here because you cannot start a variable name with a number. You can have it after text, so we could say T1 total bars and save the script. That will work just fine. You can have any number on the end of your variable name, and that will work just fine. You can have an underscore in front of your name, your variable name, and that'll be okay. You can't use any other symbol, so we couldn't use a $sign, for example. That will give us a compile error. So you can only use underscores and text to begin your variable name, and you can have numbers and underscores in your variable names. But that's as creative as you can get with your variable names. So that's important to keep in mind. But anyway, let's wrap this lesson up by counting how many bars in total have drawn onto our chart. To do that, all we need to do is increment our total bars by 1 whenever our script runs on a new bar. So let's save the script and see how many bars drew onto our chart. There you can see a diagonal line all the way from bottom left to top right. You can see that we've had 23,553 bars plotted onto our chart in total. You could also get this number by using the bar underscore index. So if I plot that onto our chart, you can see we get the same number minus 1. The reason for that is that everything in programming starts from 0. And so the very first bar on our chart is considered bar index 0. And our script would have incremented our total bars to 1. So in our script's case, let's plot total bars with a color of color.purple and save the script. Now we'll get 2 lines drawing offset by 1. So if I hover my mouse over this very first bar, you can see that our script says that this is bar number 1, whereas bar index says it's bar number 0. The reason for that is that our total bars number is incremented on the first bar, whereas bar index is not. It's only incremented after that bar is finished drawing. So it starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, so on, all the way to our final bar. And our total bars starts from 1 and counts all the way up to the last bar. So that about does it for our variable declaration rules and fundamentals. We'll be covering variable declaration in quite some detail in the lessons to come and in much more practical use cases. So again, if this is all brand new to you and you're a little bit overwhelmed, don't worry. Just keep going through this content and eventually it will start to click. You can always rewatch the lessons or send an email to support@theartoftrading.com if something doesn't make sense to you, and I can help guide you to understand these concepts better. But with that said, that brings me to the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one where we will cover getting user input in your scripts. See you there.